Exactly what occurred in the 6th episode of the 5th season of The Chosen. Last Supper, Part 3. A cold opening for the Last Supper. As Jesus prepares to break bread, he makes a note of how fervently he has wished to share their final supper together before everything is accomplished in the kingdom of God. Luke 22 verses 14 to 15. He does this while ignoring the perplexity that his disciples are experiencing. As he breaks the bread, he offers a blessing to God and explains that the bread was originally a symbol of how God saved Israel from slavery in Egypt and brought them to the Promised Land, but that it will now be a symbol of their redemption from sin. He identifies the bread as his body that was broken for the disciples, and he asks them to do this in remembrance of him. Luke 22 verse 19. He invites them to accept and eat the bread. After they have completed breaking the bread and eating, Jesus blesses the cup, recognizing that the wine had previously represented the blood of the Passover lamb, but that it will now represent the blood of the new covenant, which was shed for the forgiveness of sins. According to Luke 22 verse 20, they are also to behave in this manner in commemoration of Jesus. At the same time that each disciple is taking a sip from the cup, Jesus delivers the I am the true vine speech or poetry, in which he invites the disciples to remain in him so that they may experience complete delight. John 15:1-01. When Jesus finishes his discourse, he glances to the end of the table and smiles. He is seeing a vision of John the Baptizer, whose joy is obviously complete at this point. John 3 verse 29. Again, Jesus chooses to ignore the perplexity that the disciples are experiencing, and he declares that even though he cleaned all of them, one of them is still unclean. John 13 verse 10. After that, he goes on to explain that a person who has eaten his bread has lifted his heel against him. John 13 verse 18. Psalm 41 verse 9. It is Peter and Simon Z who push Jesus to reveal who it is so that they can restrain him and make him wish that he had never been born. See Matthew 26 verse 24. Because he is overcome with emotion, Jesus needs to take a short break, and the disciples all glance at each other in a state of shock and dread. During the 6th episode of the 5th season of The Chosen, Last Supper, Part 3, Nicodemus and Mary Magdalene are shown. A flashback takes place at the beginning of Nicodemus' story, which takes place sometime after Shmuel's ascension to the Sanhedrin and the passing of John the Baptizer, but before to the events that take place in Season 5. At the same time as Zebediah is presiding over a Sanhedrin meeting that is very dull, Nicodemus is already drifting off. Immediately following the conclusion of the meeting, he is hailed by Shmuel, who expresses his delight at his return from a recent trip to Bethel. The two are still feeling distant from one another as a result of the events that occurred in the first season, and they are unsure of how to get back together. Nicodemus continues on to a meeting with Zebediah, who is entrusted with catching him up on merely the highlights of what the Sanhedrin has been doing. He conveys his best wishes to Shmuel before continuing on to the meeting. The news of John's passing has left Nicodemus in a state of shock and grief, despite the fact that he admits that John was certainly a character when he visited him in prison. Following his inquiry regarding John's cousin, Jesus, he is taken aback to discover that even Caiaphas has delivered a speech condemning him and issued an edict against all those who are in favor of him. In response to this information, Nicodemus immediately terminates his meeting with Zebediah and rushes back to his residence. Once there, he locates Matthias, also known as the Mysterious Watcher, and has him complete a task. Returning to the present, Mary Magdalene confronts Nicodemus with the question of why he has been searching for her. In light of the fact that spies and informants are unavailable, Nicodemus admits that he had to bring her here in a covert manner. He is worried by the fact that Jesus appears to be methodically turning prospective allies into foes, calling the leaders hypocrites. He has been watching Jesus' conduct through Matthias, and he is troubled by this. As Nicodemus continues his explanation, he explains that in his role as teacher of Israel, he constantly witnesses the emergence of false messiahs, which are then put down before they ever amount to anything. However, when he observes someone gaining a genuine following among the people, he deems it his sacred responsibility to disprove him. And yet what Matthias has actually reported is the opposite. The eyes of the blind are opened, the ears of the deaf are unstopped, lame men leap like a deer, and the mute speak. Isaiah 35 verses 5-6. The people who walked in darkness see a great light. Isaiah 9 verse 2. And out of Bethlehem has come forth a ruler, whose coming forth is from ancient days. Micah 5 verse 2. Mary is perplexed as to why Nicodemus has not informed the other professors and has instead chosen to remain absent from the Sanhedrin. Nicodemus, in response, concedes that many members of the Sanhedrin are overly obsessed with money, politics, and terror due to their excessive concern. He is unable to defend himself against the allegations that he made a bogus forecast regarding others. Rather of that, he desires for Mary to signal to Jesus that he is in danger. Due to the fact that Jesus is already aware of this, Mary begs Nicodemus to acknowledge his responsibility and speak up. Before she leaves, Mary expresses her gratitude to Nicodemus for the way in which he approached her in the Red Quarter and attempted to assist her, despite the fact that it was somewhat awkward. Despite the fact that Nicodemus is dissatisfied with his own efforts, he is proud to witness the transformation that Mary has undergone as a result of Jesus. He is adamant that he will investigate the Bible in order to discover what the future holds for the Messiah. Following the departure of Mary, Nicodemus' wife, Zohara, comes in and expresses her concern on the fact that he has not been taking adequate care of himself. She is aware of what is taking place and is eager to have a conversation with Nicodemus, but he is adamant that the timing is not yet right. When Mary sees a soldier, similar to the one who sexually assaulted her, she is overcome with a flood of feelings. This occurs as she is returning from Nicodemus' house. The words that Matthias said about the individuals who are wandering in darkness, seeing a great light, and finding encouragement in them are something that she considers. While Nicodemus continues to study the messianic predictions found in the Bible alongside the teachings of Jesus in an effort to gain a better understanding of what is to come, Yosef, who is doing so under a disguise, arrives with some unfavorable news. The information that Caiaphas intends to have Jesus arrested has been conveyed by his connections. Yosef tells that there is a collaborator among the disciples, and Annas is forcing Caiaphas to hold a trial through a legal loophole. Nicodemus initially ignores the report since Caiaphas lacks the authority and could not hope to discover Jesus. However, Yosef continues to reveal that Annas is exerting pressure on Caiaphas to organize a trial. Even though Yosef maintains that the Sanhedrin is not completely corrupt, he is adamant that they must take the initiative to speak out against the corruption. In Nicodemus's opinion, it is too late to make any changes at this point. It is not possible for him to resolve the crisis by the use of forceful words, and revealing his commitment to Jesus will only result in him being excluded from further negotiations. Despite the fact that Yosef is willing to follow Nicodemus' guidance and conceal his allegiance to Jesus, he strongly encourages Nicodemus to speak up. During this interim period, Nicodemus extends an invitation to Yosef to assist him in searching the scriptures for hints of what is to come. In the 6th episode, the story continues from where the 5th episode left off, with Judas appearing before Caiaphas with Shmuel and Malchus there to accompany him. When Judas opens their discussion by elaborating on the fact that he is not like them, Caiaphas agrees with him and cites his own status as the only anointed priest who is permitted to enter the Holy of Holies because of his position. As a result of everything that Judas has witnessed, he makes it clear that he is of the opinion that, in contrast to them, he believes that Jesus is most likely the Messiah. Judas says that he hasn't seen enough, but he still has hope that Jesus will easily vanquish his captors, lead an uprising against Rome, and usher in the Messianic age. This comes after Caiaphas queries Judas about the reason he is betraying him. When Caiaphas became irritated, he dismissed Shmuel and Malchus and reprimanded Judas for speaking to him in such a brazen manner. After Judas makes a proposal to depart, Caiaphas gives him the order to remain. When Judas is in a position of power, he asserts that all they need to do is agree on a price. According to Exodus 21 verse 32, the two negotiate the price, with Judas threatening to walk and Caiaphas threatening to have him tortured. Eventually, they come to an agreement on the price, which is 30 pieces of silver for months of work or the price of a slave. Therefore, in order to avoid inciting a disturbance and bringing down the wrath of the Romans, Judas demands that Caiaphas must arrest Jesus in private. Even though Judas has high hopes that Jesus will save him, the 30 pieces of money won't be of much use to him if Rome is successful in destroying the city. Caiaphas, on the other hand, insists that Judas find a way to betray Jesus within the next 24 hours to fulfill his obligation. As Malchus directs the household staff to make certain that there is no leaven to be found in the house during the Feast of Unleavened Bread, see Exodus 12. Pilate comes in and confronts Caiaphas about his plans to arrest Jesus. Caiaphas is accused of plotting to arrest Jesus. Pilate is adamant that he has fulfilled his end of the bargain by arranging for the execution of zealots. These individuals are reviled by Rome as well as by others who are considered to be normal Jews because they are seen to be troublemakers. Caiaphas is adamant that he must bring the temperature of the messianic fever in the city down, and he asserts that a Roman representative, such as Pilate, is incapable of understanding what the Jewish people require at this time. Pilate, who is irritated by the fact that Caiaphas appears to believe that he is entitled to the particular religious exemption that the Jews have acquired, despite the fact that Rome has defeated them, issues a warning that their partnership would be severed if Caiaphas' plans cause tensions to escalate. As shown in the 6th episode of the 5th season of The Chosen, Last Supper, Part 3, Atticus, Kaphne, and Simon Z. After Atticus successfully apprehended Kaphne in Episode 5, he is currently being held in custody, in response to Kaphne's insistence that they do not have the authority to hold him. Atticus then reminds him that the only people who have rights are Roman citizens. An explanation of Atticus's knowledge of Kaphne's small, disorganized group of dissatisfied individuals is provided. These individuals lack the zealot's clarity of purpose. However, he discloses that he is aware that they are present because of Jesus and asks to know the reason for their presence. When Kaphne asserts that Jesus had both seduced and murdered his daughter, Atticus reprimands him and insists that Jesus would never have done either of those things. At the end of the story, Kaphne relates his entire story, and Atticus reprimands him for making Rama's death about himself and blaming an easy target like Jesus rather than dealing with his own guilt and loss in a manly manner. Despite this, Atticus makes the offer to release him without any charges being brought against him, so long as Kaphne continues to spread the word about how he is opposed to Jesus. The following day, Atticus decides to let Kaphne go, conducting himself as if the entire situation was an error. During the time that Atticus is leaving his group of troops and entering a Roman prison, Simon Z is observing and following him through the different streets, praising God with the words of Psalm 84. Kaphne returns to his gang of rabble-rousers and insists that the Lord has blessed their efforts by gaining him favor with Rome. In the meantime, Kaphne is praising God. Jeremiah's plea, Jeremiah 32 verses 18 to 19. The narrative of David's faked insanity, 1 Samuel 21 verses 10 to 15, and Job's acknowledgement that no plan of the Lord can be defeated, Job 42 verse 2, are all cited as examples of the other men's congratulations to him. On the other hand, his wife Naomi is not impressed and publicly reprimands him for believing that Roman partnership with Scripture is acceptable. Kaphne demands that Rama was enchanted by a spell, but Naomi argues that Rama's love for her rabbi and for Thomas was not the result of a spell. Kaphne takes her away and continues his argument. Naomi informs him that she cannot stand by and witness what hatred has made him become, despite the fact that he swears that he cannot lose her to Jesus as well. There is a second encounter between Atticus and Simon Z within the Roman prison. While Atticus is warning Jesus about the difficulties he is going to face, Z is adamant that the Messiah could not be held in any jail. Barabbas, a former friend of Z's and one of the zealots who is set to be executed on Friday, is accompanied by soldiers who arrive at the same time as they are having their conversation. Z is upset since Barabbas was the zealot who was present for the 6th episode of Season 3, and he ought to have seen enough to believe if his eyes and heart were open. This is an idea that Atticus laughs at, and he cautions Z and the other disciples that they should be careful of the possibility of getting arrested. After leaving him with 2 swords and a zealot knife, he told him that luck is what happens when preparation meets opportunity, and he wished him the best of luck. Both of the swords are taken by Simon Z, but he does not take the zealot knife. Part 3 of The Chosen Season 5 gets off to a pretty excellent start with Episode 6, which features several strong elements, including the following. The depiction of the Lord's Supper was, for the most part, satisfactory to me. I found it to be a really meaningful experience. I'm relieved that we were able to hear the majority of the true vine speech, and it makes perfect sense that it was included in the ceremony of presenting the cup. The presence of John the Baptizer at the table is not only a very emotional event, but is also a sly hint to the fact that John is the Elijah to come, taking Elijah's place at the table. The relationship between Mary Magdalene and Nicodemus. Although I have some problems with the plot of Nicodemus, which I will discuss further down, I typically enjoy his interactions with Mary, and I am happy that the program brought them back together. Mary expressed her gratitude to him for the last time, and his response was quite heartfelt. Mary's trauma revisited. I appreciate that we received a little throwback to Mary's trauma response to Roman soldiers, and that we saw how she has grown, overcoming the trauma by finding encouragement in Isaiah 9 verse 2. I also like that we showed how she has developed. On the other hand, I believe that this particular section could have benefited from a little bit more space. Caiaphas and Judas. The back-and-forth scuffles and talks that take place between Caiaphas and Judas are fierce and captivating. My one and only criticism is that I believe Judas should have made an initial attempt to persuade Caiaphas to consider joining forces with Jesus, but he was unsuccessful in doing so. Atticus, Caphne, and Simon Z. I have some concerns regarding Atticus' narrative. Once again, more on this later, but I have no problems with his actual discussion with Caphne. He is the ideal persona to humiliate Caphne for putting his shame on Jesus rather than dealing with it himself. He is the appropriate guy to accomplish this. Furthermore, I continue to enjoy the relationship that exists between him and Simon Z, and the fact that he is the one who offers the sword appears to have a very suggestive thematic impact. The identity of Barabbas. I think it's a great idea to propose that Barabbas is the zealot who saw the indications that Jesus was making but did not respond to them. This is a wonderful method to demonstrate that not all those who witnessed the signs that Jesus performed went on to have genuine faith, and it also offers some intriguing context for the story that will be told in Season 6. The identity of the Watcher. Although I had anticipated that Mark would be the Watcher, Matthias is a more suitable candidate. According to Acts 1 verses 21 to 22, one of the most important prerequisites for becoming an apostle is to have been a witness to the words and miraculous works that Jesus performed throughout his ministry. In earlier seasons of the show, there were no non-apostle male disciples who were able to fulfill that condition. However, the backstory that was presented to Matthias makes him suitable to take the place of Judas. Acts 1 verses 23 to 26. Regarding the performances, Richard Fancy continues to exude the energy of a nasty guy in his role as Caiaphas, while Luke Demian is impressive in his role as Judas. I thought it was great to see Eric Avari back in the role of Nicodemus, since he is always interesting, and it was also lovely to see Liz Tabish get a bit more to do in her role as Mary Magdalene. The relationship between Elijah Alexander, who plays Atticus, and Allah Safi, who plays Simon Z, is quite powerful. Nevertheless, there were a few problems with Episode 6. True Vine Quibble. Although I appreciate the inclusion of the True Vine discourse, I believe that it is a mistake to separate it from the command to love as Jesus loved us. John 15 verses 12 to 17. It is very obvious that the love command is intended to make explicit what it means to bear fruit. It is especially disheartening since the cup symbolizes the love that Jesus has poured out for us. It is a wonderful illustration of how we, in turn, are commanded to pour out wine-filled fruit for one another. There is a flashback to Nicodemus' return to the Sanhedrin, but I'm not sure if it was actually necessary for us to see it. If nothing else, it might have been reduced in size at the very least. It was fascinating to see Nicodemus's reaction to John's passing, as well as his uneasy reunion with Shmuel. Nevertheless, it was not actually necessary for us to witness him sending Matthias out, because we were able to obtain the same information immediately afterward in his meeting with Mary. The timing and methods of Nicodemus. If Nicodemus was concerned about Jesus bringing down wrath, then why didn't he have Matthias warn them earlier? Does he genuinely believe that Mary is a spy who is going to denounce him to the authorities? Moreover, if she was, why would it be significant if she was aware of the location of his residence? Surely, the Sanhedrin is aware of this information. The kidnapping of Mary at the end of episode 5 feels like a contrived cliffhanger, since there are no satisfying solutions to issues like these. It is not an organic outworking of the story itself, because there are no answers to these problems. Atticus methods. The program has been really building up Atticus as this fantastic 4D chess player, so I was a little bit surprised when his plan with Kaphne was just to encourage him to keep doing what he's been doing up to that point. For Atticus to make his point, was it really necessary for him to be arrested from the beginning? In addition, it appears that the arrest was not a logical progression of the story, but rather an artificial plot element that was fabricated in order to generate tension at the conclusion of the previous episode. In a general sense, Atticus is starting to feel like a bit of story crutch. Due to the fact that no one is truly aware of his intentions or approach, he is able to arrive up and make whatever it is that the writers require him to do. I believe that this is the issue that arises when you have a character whose plans are kept a secret. During our podcast discussion of episodes 3 to 5, one of my co-hosts stated that he would cry if there was one more conversation among the authorities about what to do with Jesus. This led to the conclusion that there is an excessive amount of worrying and an insufficient amount of movement. It is my fear that he will, in fact, be crying after the third part. Due to the fact that Pilate was already aware of what Caiaphas had planned and the relationship between the two of them was already hostile, the conversation that took place between Caiaphas and Pilate produced no significant results. This episode seemed to have an excessive number of talks that essentially consisted of people worrying about what will happen next. Nicodemus and Mary, Nicodemus and Yusuf, Caiaphas and Pilate, Atticus and Simon Z. Throughout this episode, it seemed like there were too many conversations. I will, once more, be updating this page at a later time with my comments on the primary concepts that were presented in the episode. A couple that I will most likely emphasize are: keeping in mind, during the beginning of episode 6, when Jesus first introduces the concept of the Lord's Supper, the idea of remembering is introduced. In the past, the bread served as a symbol of God's redemption of Israel from slavery and his provision of sustenance for them, as they were traveling through the wilderness on their path to the promised land. Now, however, when the disciples break the bread, they are to do so in remembrance of the fact that Jesus' body was broken into pieces for them. In the same manner, Jesus says that the cup was formerly used to symbolize the blood of the Passover lamb, but that it will now be used to symbolize the blood that he shed for the remission of sins. We are able to live with Jesus in the present and acquire the strength we require to bear fruit through our own acts of love and sacrifice by remembering how Jesus died in the past. This is a crucial component of maintaining our relationship with him. The appearance of a vision of John the Baptist at the table provides Jesus with the opportunity to have a conversation with the past personally. Although the passing of John was a horrible event, Jesus finds that remembering it brings him some measure of solace and encouragement as he gets ready to confront his own mortality. In a similar manner, remembering the death of Jesus can provide us with solace and encouragement when we are confronted with death, whether it be in a real or metaphorical sense. In episode 6, Jesus is not the only person who is reminded of John, but also other people. As a result of hearing about John's passing, Nicodemus is compelled to reflect on his interactions with the baptizer as well as with Jesus himself. As a result of these memories, Nicodemus is jolted out of his complacency and brought back into action. At the same time, Nicodemus is wary because he is afraid of the consequences that may result from yet another failed revolution. This is because he is reminded of the numerous failed messiahs and prophets that have brought Roman fury. Just before Mary and Nicodemus split ways, she makes a special effort to recall their initial meeting and expresses her gratitude to him for his contribution. As a result of this recollection, Nicodemus appears to be motivated to redouble his efforts to explore the scriptures for hints about what is approaching. On her walk home, Mary comes face to face with a Roman soldier, similar to the one who sexually assaulted her. This soldier serves as a reminder of her own tragic past. There is a brief time in which feelings of grief and panic appear to reappear. On the other hand, Mary is able to triumph over these dreadful recollections by recollecting Isaiah 9 verse 2 and discovering solace, healing, and hope. The passing of his cherished daughter, Rama, is another traumatic event that Kaphne is having a hard time coming to terms with. On the other hand, as Atticus points out, Kaphne is purposefully misremembering what took place in order to avoid dealing with his own feelings of shame and loss. In spite of the fact that this is obviously not the case, he continues to talk about Jesus killing and seducing his daughter. As a result of Kaphne's inability to accurately recall the past, he is directing himself toward a future that is even more bleak, rather than discovering the solace and healing that he truly requires. Naomi makes the observation that it is notable that when Kaphne is met by his troops, all of them misremember scripture. They misapply biblical stories or facts in order to defend their own foolish behavior, which is another thing that appears significant. In addition, Simon Z is confronted with difficult recollections as he follows Atticus into a Roman prison and encounters Barabbas, a former countryman of his as well. After they have finished their conversation, Atticus gives Simon a zealot Sicarii dagger, which serves as a reminder of his history as a violent individual. In spite of the fact that he takes the two swords from Atticus, Simon makes the decision to leave the dagger behind. When Z made the decision to join Jesus, he threw his own knife into the Jordan River. Z is doing the right thing by remembering what he pledged to when he first started following Jesus by letting go of the dagger. In conclusion, we can discover the strength and hope we require to confront our own pain and trials by recalling the acts of deliverance that God has performed and the suffering that others have endured before us. During times of difficulty, it is also crucial to remember the scriptures as a means of finding solace, therapeutic healing, and knowledge. On the other hand, memory can sometimes be a barrier. We are susceptible to being overpowered or tempted by negative memories or false recollections, unless we are able to counteract them with memories of the truth. Seeing it and having faith. The Lord's Supper is traditionally regarded as a sacrament in Christian theology. One definition of a sacrament is a visible indication of an invisible truth. The gospel would be an invisible reality if it were not for sacraments such as communion. It would be something that we could hear about but never actually see. By granting us communion, Jesus is assuring that his church will be able to see a sign of his sacrificed death throughout all generations. This understanding will be passed down from generation to generation. The fruit that is produced by his disciples, which consists of acts of selfless love for other people, will be another tangible indication of Christ's continuous presence and power in the lives of his disciples. John 15 verse 9. Nicodemus dispatches Matthias to observe the deeds of Jesus with the intention of leading him to disbelieve. Matthias, on the other hand, is converted to faith as a result of the things that he witnesses and recounts to Nicodemus, which include the blind seeing, the deaf hearing, the handicapped leaping, and the dead being revived. However, it is not always sufficient to just witness miracles in order to believe. It is only through the lens of messianic predictions that Matthias and Nicodemus are able to make sense of the miracles that they have witnessed. However, the Sanhedrin is so preoccupied with money, politics, and fear that it is unable to perceive things in the right way. In addition, Judas has witnessed a great number of miracles, which are sufficient to persuade them that Jesus is probably the Messiah. In spite of this, He confesses to Caiaphas that he has not seen enough. To put it another way, he has not witnessed Jesus performing the action that he believes Jesus ought to perform. The purpose of his betrayal is to coerce Jesus into revealing the celestial glory that Judas believes he possesses. He is attempting to force Jesus' hand. However, Judas does not possess the faith that is necessary to continue to believe in Jesus in the event that he ends up acting in a manner that is unexpected. It would appear that Barabbas had only a limited amount of faith based on the miracles that he witnessed Jesus do in the 6th episode of the 3rd season. Z is adamant that what Barabbas seen ought to have been sufficient, provided that his eyes and heart were truly open. On the other hand, it is evident, as Atticus points out, that both his eyes and his heart were closed. As a consequence of this, Barabbas' faith did not last long, and he went back to his previous pattern of behavior, just as Judas seemed to be poised to do. In the 6th episode of the 5th season of The Chosen, what were your thoughts? Thank you for taking the time to share your thoughts, questions, and hypotheses in the comment section below. The selected questions for the introduction to Episode 6, 2 Schools. As a way to kick off your conversation, ask your young, upon hearing the word Pharisee, what is the first thing that comes to your mind? Words such as legalism, self-righteousness, works righteousness, hypocrisy, regulations, and religion are likely to be encountered and discussed. Reiterate these responses, but also bring attention to the following. Not a single one of us has ever known a person who is a literal Pharisee. The vast majority of us are only aware of what the Gospels have to say about them. The harsh phrases that Jesus uses against the Pharisees in the Gospels give us the sense that they are all cruel and awful religious bullies. This impression is formed for us when we hear these remarks. On the other hand, it is essential to acknowledge that this was not how the majority of people in Jesus' day saw them. Pharisees were revered by the general populace because they were considered to be intelligent and faithful servants of God. It is also beneficial to be aware of the fact that the views held by Jesus and the Pharisees were actually quite similar to one another. Jesus' beliefs were, in point of fact, considerably more similar to those of the Pharisees than they were to those of the Sadducees and the priests. It is not that Jesus is attacking another religious group when he uses strong language to condemn the hypocrisy of the Pharisees. Rather, he is denouncing his own people. On the other hand, it is comparable to a Christian leader in the modern day speaking out against the hypocrisy of other Christian leaders. At this point, I would like to inquire, what do you think it would have been like to be a Pharisee in the real world? Encourage your young people to give this question a lot of thought. Perhaps you would like to elaborate on it a little bit further by asking follow-up questions such as, in your opinion, what was it like to be a participant in the Pharisees' educational system? Who or what would they be concentrating on? Please share your thoughts on what it must have been like to be a teacher to the Pharisees. Who or what would they be concentrating on? In the event that two Pharisees were to argue with one another, what do you suppose they would do in response to the confrontation? What do you think the relationship was between Pharisees and common people? Do you believe that common people had any kind of relationship with the Pharisees? Explain the following to your young people after you have assisted them in developing a mental image of what it would be like to be a Pharisee. The events of this episode paint a picture for us of what life was like for two different groups, namely two different sets of teachers and students. To begin, we will gain an understanding of the circumstances that were present in the lives of Rabbi Jesus and his disciples Mary Magdalene, Peter, Andrew, James, and John. On the other side, we will learn about the experiences that Rabbi Nicodemus, his pupil Shmuel, and the other Pharisees underwent during their lifetimes. Let us imagine that we are observing two schools, the school of Jesus and the school of the Pharisees. As we watch this episode, we get the opportunity to contemplate the ways in which each school functions and the ways in which they are compared to one another. This topic will be further discussed after the screening. Watching the 6th episode of The Chosen. Because of the restrictions imposed by COVID, my youth group viewed The Chosen online through the use of Zoom. A link to the 6th episode can be found on YouTube. You are able to locate it on Amazon if you do not like to stream it, or if you wish to skip the advertisements. There are a lot of them. During the time that I was watching The Chosen, I occasionally participated in the chat and offered comments, but I made an effort to avoid teaching too much. Rather than viewing The Chosen as merely an elaborate instance of preaching, I wanted the younger generation to take pleasure in it. The majority of the time, I just clarified who the characters were, and on occasion, I provided a brief explanation of a reference or allusion that could have been unclear to me when I was younger. Questions for discussion regarding the selected episode 6. As a way to kick off your conversation, ask your young, what were your thoughts on the episode that you watched? What stood out to you the most? I would now make a large Venn diagram on a whiteboard, either a physical one or a virtual one, and title one of the circles the School of Jesus and the other circle the School of the Pharisees. Remind your pupils that the Venn diagram is a representation of the relationship between the two schools of thought. There were two schools that we were able to observe in action while we were watching the program. These were the School of Jesus and the School of the Pharisees. Even though it is obvious that they are not schools in the traditional sense that we think of schools today, we are going to use it as a means to talk about them. On the one hand, we were able to observe how the pupils of Jesus, including Mary Magdalene, Simon, Andrew, and others, reacted when Jesus confronted them with a variety of challenges in order to instruct them and give them the ability to minister to others. On the other side, we were also able to observe the manner in which Nicodemus, Shmuel, and the council of the Pharisees reacted to situations that could have been educational opportunities. Now, inquire of your younger generation. What was it like to live under the rule of the Pharisees at the school? It is possible that you may like to reconsider some of the questions that you posed before, such as, what was it like to be a student to you? You also have the option of guiding them through a few critical scenes, such as the following moments. The gathering at which Shmuel receives a severe reprimand for acting in a circumspect manner with Nicodemus. The talk that took place between Shmuel and Nicodemus, which was more private. The confrontation that takes place between Jesus and Shmuel at the conclusion of the episode. When you have finished constructing a detailed account of what it is like to be a Pharisee, you should then turn to the opposite circle and ask, how did living in the school of Jesus compare to other schools? You may once more go back and ask some of the same questions that you asked about the Pharisees, for example. What was it like to be a student? Alternatively, you could go through a few key scenes, such as the following. Whenever Jesus had a conversation with Simon on how to take care of his ema, the manner in which Jesus deals with the situation of the leper, the many ways in which Simon and Mary react to the multitude that is gathered to listen to Jesus, the manner in which Jesus reacts when a man who is brought to him is lowered down to him. As you begin to amass examples and data, it is important to engage the two rings in discussion with one another. Observe things and investigate them with questions. Just one example. It is clear that Jesus is compassionate and concerned for Simon. Are you of the opinion that Shmuel has been treated with the same level of kindness by his teachers? According to your estimation, what kind of an influence has that had? It would appear that Jesus uses unanticipated events, such as the leper or the man being lowered down, as opportunities to teach. What are your thoughts on whether Shmuel or Nicodemus would react in the same manner? How come? Also, don't forget to search for what the two circles have in common, which is the area where they overlap. Just one example. Jesus does not shy away from discussing controversial topics that are extremely significant. As far as his comfort level with the concept of hell is concerned, he is probably more similar to the Pharisees than he is to us. Jesus and the Pharisees both place a great importance on teaching people about what God requires of us, in contrast to many Christians in today's world who are reluctant to emphasize what it means to obey God. Asking your young people the following questions will bring the topic closer to home. If our church or youth group were to become similar to the school of the Pharisees, would there be any possibility that this might happen? If we were to live our lives from the perspective of students in the school of Jesus, what would that look like? When Nicodemus eventually meets Jesus, and the two of them have their famous born-again talk, the 7th episode of The Chosen brings us to the most exciting part of Nicodemus' journey. The charisma that Jonathan Rumi brings to the part of Jesus is on full show in this scene, while Eric Avari gives a touching performance as Nicodemus. It is a tremendous scene. In addition, The scenario brought to my mind the exceptional value that a prolonged series such as The Chosen possesses. Despite the fact that I have read this conversation between Jesus and Nicodemus dozens of times, The Chosen made it more interesting by providing more background information and putting it in a more contextualized setting. The Chosen makes a number of adjustments in order to adapt this conversation between Jesus and Nicodemus for the screen. These modifications are made in a prudent manner. The discussion is portrayed in the Gospel of John as being very one-sided, with Jesus focusing on theological matters while Nicodemus just offers a few remarks. The Chosen makes the scene significantly more dynamic by inserting a great deal more back and forth. Jesus invites Nicodemus to reply at many points and expand upon his comments. He also takes some of his metaphors from the environment itself, rather than introducing them as if they were coming out of nowhere. The Chosen also makes Nicodemus much more overtly receptive to what Jesus says than he is in the Gospel of John, to the point where it appears that Nicodemus arrives at a fairly high Christology. The most intriguing shift, on the other hand, occurs right at the very conclusion of the talk. According to the Gospel of John, the conversation that took place between Jesus and Nicodemus does not truly come to a satisfactory conclusion. In point of fact, there is some controversy regarding the manner in which the conversation truly concludes. In some translations, the statements found in John 3 verses 16 to 21 are those of Jesus, but in others, they are presented as commentary from the storyteller. It is important to keep in mind that the original text does not contain any quotation marks, paragraphs, red letters, or headings. By the time Jesus' statements come to a close, it is still unclear where the relationship between Jesus and Nicodemus is at. This is true regardless of how one assesses the disagreement concerning verses 16 to 21. Nicodemus does not have the opportunity to say his final words, and the scene does not provide any other hints about how he responded to the teaching that Jesus gave. It would be extremely frustrating if a show like The Chosen were to abruptly end the scene in the same way that John does during the episode. However, despite the fact that The Chosen does bring the action to a satisfactory conclusion, it still concludes on a note that is rather vague. Spoiler alert: in the following episode, Nicodemus does not show up to the rendezvous at the set time, but instead looks on with regret and desire. Jesus extends an invitation to Nicodemus to follow him, and then gives him several days to think about the offer. For the time being, the audience is left wondering about his current spiritual state and how his refusal to follow Jesus would influence his perspective of him in the future. When it comes to youth, there's a lot to go into here. Despite the fact that they do so in quite different ways, our primary focus will be on the manner in which the ambiguity of Nicodemus' spiritual position is suggested by both the Gospel of John and The Chosen. The selected questions for the introduction to Episode 7, The Mysteries of Nicodemus. For the first step, have your students. Have you ever attempted to determine whether or not a person truly believed in Jesus, but you were unsuccessful? How come? To begin, it would be helpful to share an example from your own personal experience. You could talk about a buddy you knew who would attend a church but never really appear to take it seriously, or you could talk about a member of your family who claimed to believe in God, but you had a hard time determining whether or not they completely grasped the gospel. Tell your young people the following. There are times when we behave as if individuals can be categorized into only two categories: the box for those who believe in Jesus, and the box for those who do not believe in Jesus for some reason. In the actual world, we are aware that classifying individuals is not one of the easiest things to do. Although there are a lot of individuals who are interested in Jesus and who might think that he is unique in some manner, they're not yet prepared to put their complete faith in him for their salvation. During the time that Jesus was alive, there were a great number of seekers like this. They witnessed the miracles that Jesus did and realized that he must have been a prophet of some type. Nonetheless, they were not yet prepared to put their complete belief in him. One of the most well-known interactions that Jesus had with a person who was looking for something is the famous born-again talk that he had with Nicodemus, a well-known Pharisee scholar. Read John 3 verses 1 to 21 at this time. During this time, there was a Pharisee by the name of Nicodemus who was a leader of the Jewish people. This man approached Jesus in the middle of the night and said, "Rabbi, we know that you are a teacher come from God, because no one can do these signs that you do unless God is with him." Jesus responded to him by saying, "Truly, truly, I say to you, unless one is born again, he cannot see the kingdom of God." Nicodemus then asked Jesus, "How can a man be born when he is old? Would it be possible for him to enter his mother's womb for a second time and be born?" In response, Jesus said, "I say to you, without a doubt, that if a person is not born of water and the Spirit, then they will not be able to enter the kingdom of God. Those who are born of the flesh are considered to be flesh, while those who are born of the Spirit are considered to be spirit. You should not be surprised by the fact that I told you. You need to be born again. The wind blows wherever it pleases, and you may hear its sound, but you have no idea where it comes from or where it is going. Similarly, this is true for every individual who is born of the Spirit. How is it possible for these things to be?" Nicodemus asked him. Jesus responded to him by asking, "Are you the teacher of Israel, and yet you do not comprehend these things? I say this to you with all sincerity. We speak of what we know and bore witness to what we have seen, yet you do not receive our testimony. If I have told you things from this world, and you have not believed them, then how can you possibly believe what I have to say about things from heaven? The Son of Man, who descended from heaven, is the only person who has ever ascended into heaven. It is necessary that the Son of Man be lifted up in the same way that Moses lifted up the snake in the desert. This will allow anybody who believes in him to have the opportunity to have eternal life. It is because God loves the world so much that he gave his one and only Son, so that anybody who believes in him would not be condemned to hell, but rather have eternal life. Because God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but rather to rescue the world through him. For this is the reason why God sent his Son into the world. Those who have faith in him are not condemned, but those who do not believe are already condemned because they have not put their faith in the name of the one and only Son of God. And this is the judgment. The light has entered the world, and people have chosen to embrace the darkness rather than the light because the actions that they have done are evil. The reason for this is that everyone who engages in wicked behavior despises the light and avoids coming into the light in order to avoid having his works exposed. According to the English Standard Version of the Bible, ESV, John 3 verses 1 to 21, "But whomever does what is true comes to the light, so that it may be clearly seen that his efforts have been carried." I would like to make it clear to your students that you will not be able to delve into all of the fine aspects of what Jesus is saying once you have finished reading their work. The conversation that he is having with Nicodemus constitutes the primary focus of your attention. Inquire with your younger generation. Considering that we are about to have this talk, what do you suppose Nicodemus believes about Jesus? What would you say his level of faith is on a scale from 1 to 10? To what extent does Nicodemus' tone change throughout the conversation? It is unclear why he is asking these questions. Is he interested in it? Are you defensive? Are you simply perplexed? By the time we reach the conclusion of this discourse, what do you feel Nicodemus' beliefs are regarding Jesus? According to a scale from 1 to 10, has his religion grown stronger, grown weaker, or remained the same? Bring to the attention of your younger generation. It is possible that you will observe that the conversation abruptly ends and immediately transitions to a different story. In reality, Nicodemus most likely responded to what Jesus said, but John does not include that information in his account. In the same way that we frequently lack clarity on the whereabouts of seekers and the degree to which they have faith in Jesus, he desires for us to be uncertain about Nicodemus. There are only a few additional instances in the Bible when Nicodemus is encountered. Next, he will make an appearance at a gathering of the chief priests and Pharisees, the majority of whom are opposed to Jesus. They dispatch some guards to arrest Jesus, but when they return, they find that they have accomplished nothing. Read John 7 verses 45 to 52 at this time. The officers then went to the chief priests and Pharisees, who asked them, "Why did you not bring him?" in response to their statements. The cops responded by saying, "No one is ever going to speak like this man. One of the responses that the Pharisees gave was, "Have you also been deceived? Are there any members of the Pharisees or the authorities who have believed in him? But this crowd that does not know the law is cursed." Nicodemus, who had gone to him before and who was one of them, said to them, "Does our law judge a man without first giving him a hearing and learning what he does?" Nicodemus had gone to him before. They responded, "Are you also from the region of Galilee? When you search, you will find that there is no prophet who comes from Galilee." John 7 verses 45 to 52 ESV. Following the reading, I want to question your young people. If you were to speculate, where do you suppose Nicodemus is currently in his path toward believing in Jesus? Which end of the religion spectrum does he fall on? What obstacles are Nicodemus encountering that are stopping him from having a more complete faith in Jesus? This particular moment contains a great deal of ambiguity. We are undecided as to whether Nicodemus is willing to stand up for Jesus because he genuinely believes in him and is attempting to show his support for him in a covert manner without drawing attention to himself, or whether he is still uncertain about Jesus but simply wants to be fair. The text makes it quite obvious that the other Pharisees and chief priests come down hard on him simply for wishing to give Jesus a fair hearing. This is said to be the case regardless of the circumstances. It makes perfect reason that he might be reluctant to publicly express his faith in Jesus. Nevertheless, at the same time, the insecurity of the Pharisees might actually strengthen Nicodemus' feeling that he is on the wrong side of the conflict. Discuss with your young people the fact that Nicodemus makes an appearance in the last scene of the Gospel of John, and then read them the following passage. Following these events, Joseph of Arimathea, who was a disciple of Jesus but kept his faith in Jesus a secret out of fear of the Jews, approached Pilate with a request to remove the body of Jesus, and Pilate granted him permission to do so. It was then that he arrived and removed his body. In addition, Nicodemus, who had previously visited Jesus in the night, arrived with a mixture of myrrh and aloes that weighed around 75 pounds. According to the Jewish tradition of burial, they removed the body of Jesus and tied it in linen cloths with spices. This was done in accordance with burial customs. Now, in the location where he was crucified, there was a garden, and within the garden, there was a new tomb in which individuals had not yet been laid to rest. It was because of the Jewish day of preparation that they placed Jesus to rest in the tomb, which was located in close proximity to the tomb. Exegesis of John 19 verses 38 to 82. Mention the following to your students. This chapter establishes a connection between Nicodemus and another Jewish follower who goes by the name Joseph of Arimathea. Experience the impact of their encounter with Jesus? Do you believe that Zohara would react differently to Nicodemus' spiritual struggle if she had the opportunity to meet Jesus? Is that the case? What did you learn about the compassion that Jesus has for women whose lives are going to be upended by the arrival of his kingdom? In the present day, what are some of the ways in which the kingdom of Jesus could potentially disturb the lives of women? With regard to women in these circumstances, what do you believe Jesus wants for them? Photina, also known as the Samaritan woman at the well, is the person you should remind your students about. In biblical days, it was not usual practice to be remarried numerous times or to live with someone to whom you're not married. Today, these activities are commonplace. It would have been considered a sign of low character for Photina to have to go fetch water in the middle of the afternoon when it was extremely hot, rather than going early in the morning when it was cool. The other ladies looked down on her because of this particular behavior. Additionally, you may have noted that there was a debate on how Photina was a Samaritan and how Jews and Samaritans had a strong animosity for one another. Despite the fact that they were both descendants of the early Israelites, the Samaritans had blended in with other people groups, chosen a different temple, and had other issues on the manner in which they worshipped. Photina made the observation that the majority of rabbis would not be caught dead talking to a Samaritan lady who had a history of sexual misconduct. But the majority of rabbis were not like Jesus. Now, inquire of your younger generation. The manner in which Jesus engaged with Photina is something that you have observed. Occasionally, the tone of their discourse became a little bit tense. Why do you believe Fotina would occasionally respond to Jesus in a manner that was a little bit harsh? During that time, did you take note of how Jesus responded to the situation? What are your thoughts on why he did that? What have you learned about the compassion that Jesus has for women who have a history that is replete with feelings of shame and regret? What are some examples of situations that women face today that cause them to feel a sense of humiliation and remorse, similar to what Fotina did? What do you think the heart of Jesus is like for women who are in situations like these? To what extent would it be possible for us as a community to carry out this demonstration?